Imagine two students sitting side by side in a classroom. Both are 16 years old, both raised in similar middle-class homes, both with equivalent access to resources. Their teacher introduces a new mathematical concept, one that neither has encountered before. 40 minutes later, one student has not only grasped the concept but has begun applying it to solve novel problems. The other remains frustrated, struggling with the fundamental principles. Why? In a laboratory at Stanford University, two adults are learning to play a musical instrument they have never touched before. Their brain activity is being monitored through functional magnetic resonance imaging. After 5 30-minute practice sessions, one participant can play a simple melody with reasonable proficiency. The other can barely produce coherent notes. The brain scans reveal dramatically different patterns of neural activity. The question echoes, why? This disparity in learning speed is not just a matter of intelligence as we conventionally understand it. It is not simply about being smarter. If it were, we would expect people who learn math quickly to also learn languages quickly, to master physical skills quickly, to adapt to new social environments quickly. Yet the psychologist who excels at understanding complex human dynamics might struggle hopelessly with basic algebra. The mathematician who revolutionizes number theory might be utterly incapable of learning to dance. What separates fast learners from slow? Is it genetics, environment, strategy, motivation? The answer, as we will discover, contains elements of each, but combined in ways that might surprise you, challenge your assumptions about human potential, and possibly transform how you approach your own learning journey. The question of why some people learn faster than others has fascinated scholars since antiquity. Plato, writing in 380 BCE, proposed that learning was actually a form of remembering, that souls contained all knowledge from previous lives and simply needed to recollect it. Those who learned quickly, in this view, simply had better access to this innate knowledge. This philosophical perspective gave way to more empirical approaches in the 19th century. Sir Francis Galton, a British polymath and half-cousin of Charles Darwin, became obsessed with measuring human differences, including learning capacity. In his 1869 work, Hereditary Genius, Galton argued that intellectual abilities were primarily inherited. He attempted to prove this by studying the family trees of eminent individuals, finding that achievement tended to run in families, which he attributed to biological inheritance rather than environmental advantages. The nature versus nurture debate had begun, and it would dominate discussions about learning differences for generations. By the early 20th century, intelligence testing had emerged as an attempt to quantify these differences. In 1904, French psychologist Alfred Binet developed the first practical intelligence test to identify children who needed educational support. This eventually evolved into the intelligence quotient or IQ test, which purported to measure a person's innate intellectual potential relative to their peers. For decades, these tests were treated as definitive measurements of learning capacity. High IQ scores were expected to predict faster learning across all domains. But reality proved more complex. In 1983, Howard Gardner of Harvard University proposed his theory of multiple intelligences, suggesting that human cognitive ability was not a single, unified capacity but rather a collection of relatively independent abilities. Linguistic, logical, mathematical, spatial, musical, bodily kinesthetic, interpersonal, intrapersonal, and later naturalistic. This brought an important insight. Perhaps faster learning was domain-specific. Someone might learn mathematics rapidly while struggling with languages, or excel at picking up social cues while finding spatial reasoning challenging. Meanwhile, in the late 1970s, Stanford psychologist Carol Dweck began research that would eventually lead to another breakthrough in understanding learning differences. Rather than focusing on innate capacity, Dweck examined how people's beliefs about their own abilities affected their learning. She identified two mindsets: fixed and growth. Those with fixed mindsets believed their abilities were static traits, while those with growth mindsets saw abilities as qualities that could be developed through dedication and effort. Dweck's research revealed something surprising. Regardless of initial ability levels, students with growth mindsets ultimately learned faster and achieved more than those with fixed mindsets. This suggested that psychological factors might be as important as cognitive ones in determining learning speed. By the turn of the millennium, the field had expanded dramatically. Cognitive neuroscience began revealing the physical changes that occur in the brain during learning. Genetic studies started identifying specific genes associated with various aspects of cognition. Social psychologists explored how cultural and environmental factors shaped learning outcomes. The question was no longer whether nature or nurture determined learning speed, but how these factors interacted. In 2007, Anders Ericsson's work on deliberate practice gained mainstream attention through Malcolm Gladwell's book, Outliers, which popularized the 10,000-hour rule. The idea that expertise in any field requires approximately 10,000 hours of dedicated practice. This shifted focus toward learning methods rather than innate capacities. Yet even as scientists accumulated more data, the fundamental question remained elusive. Why, given the same environment, the same teaching methods, and similar backgrounds, do some people consistently learn faster than others? To answer this, we need to look deeper, not just at different theories, but at how these theories intersect in the complex reality of human learning. And we need to begin with a surprising truth. Learning itself is not a single process but a constellation of interrelated mechanisms that can vary dramatically between individuals. To understand why certain people learn faster, we must first understand what happens in the brain during learning. When we learn something new, our brains physically change. Neurons form new connections, strengthening pathways that correspond to the new knowledge or skill. This process is called neuroplasticity, and it occurs throughout our lives, though it is most pronounced in childhood and adolescence. Recent research from Dr. Kathleen Jagus' laboratory at UC Berkeley has shown that the speed and efficiency of this process varies significantly between individuals. Using advanced imaging techniques, Jagus and her team monitored the formation of neural connections in participants learning a new language. They found that faster learners showed more rapid growth of dendritic spines, tiny protrusions on neurons that receive inputs from other neurons. The variability was striking, Jagus noted in a 2019 paper published in Nature Neuroscience. Some participants formed stable neural connections within hours, while others required days to achieve the same level of connectivity. But why would some brains rewire themselves more efficiently? Is it purely genetic? Genetics certainly plays a role. A groundbreaking study led by Dr. Robert Chong at MIT in 2018 identified a cluster of genes associated with synaptic plasticity, the ability of synapses, connections between neurons, to strengthen or weaken over time. One gene in particular, NRXN1, showed significant variation across the population. Individuals with certain variants of this gene demonstrated faster formation of neural pathways when learning new information. Yet genetics alone cannot explain the differences in learning speed. Identical twins, despite sharing 100% of their DNA, often show different learning patterns. Environmental factors must also be at play. One crucial environmental factor appears to be early childhood experience. Dr. Rachel Caraway, a developmental neuroscientist at the University of Michigan, has studied how early exposure to complex environments affects brain development. Her research shows that children raised in linguistically rich environments develop more complex neural networks in language processing regions by age 5. These enhanced networks don't just help with language learning, Caraway explains. They create a more efficient architecture for all types of information processing, which can translate to faster learning across multiple domains later in life. This raises a challenging question. Are faster learners simply those who had better early childhood environments? Not exactly. The relationship is more complex. Consider the case of Keith Johnson, who struggled with reading throughout elementary school despite growing up in a home filled with books and educated parents who read to him daily. Diagnosed with dyslexia at age 9, Johnson nonetheless went on to become a brilliant physicist, learning complex mathematical concepts with remarkable speed. Johnson's story highlights another critical factor. Learning is not a monolithic process. Different types of learning involve different neural pathways. Some people process visual information more efficiently, others excel at auditory learning, and still others learn best through hands-on experience. Dr. Mariam Saperi at Johns Hopkins University has identified at least 7 distinct neural networks involved in different aspects of learning. Her research indicates that these networks develop at different rates in different individuals, creating unique learning profiles. What we call fast learning is often domain-specific, Saperi explains. Someone who learns mathematical concepts quickly might struggle with social nuances, not because they are smarter in one area than another, but because different neural networks are involved. This helps explain why traditional IQ tests often fail to predict learning speed across diverse domains. They primarily measure analytical abilities, missing other crucial aspects of cognitive functioning. The mystery deepens when we consider the role of attention and working memory. Dr. Liam Nakamura's research at the University of Toronto has revealed that faster learners typically exhibit superior abilities to focus their attention and manage information in working memory. Using EEG recordings, Nakamura's team measured participants' neural responses while they attempted to learn new material under distracting conditions. Faster learners showed distinctive patterns of brain activity that indicated more effective filtering of irrelevant information. It's not that faster learners have bigger or more powerful brains, Nakamura notes. Their advantage lies in their ability to allocate cognitive resources more efficiently. They focus on what matters and disregard what doesn't. This efficiency extends to memory consolidation, the process by which short-term memories are converted into long-term memories. Dr. Sofia Ramirez at the University of California, San Diego has studied how sleep affects learning speed. Her research shows that faster learners experience more intense slow-wave sleep activity, which is associated with memory consolidation. Using sleep monitoring devices, Ramirez tracked participants learning a complex skill over several days. Those who learned fastest showed up to 40% more slow-wave activity during sleep. This suggested that faster learners not only acquire information more efficiently while awake, but also consolidate it more effectively while asleep. Yet the pattern becomes more puzzling when motivation enters the picture. Dr. Victor Larsson's work at the University of Chicago examined the relationship between learning speed and intrinsic motivation, the internal desire to learn for its own sake, rather than for external rewards. Larsson's team found that intrinsic motivation correlated strongly with learning speed, but the relationship was bidirectional. People learned faster when they were intrinsically motivated, but they also became more intrinsically motivated when they experienced the satisfaction of learning quickly. This creates a virtuous or vicious cycle. Those who initially learn quickly become more motivated, which helps them learn even faster, while those who struggle may lose motivation, further impeding their progress. The question then becomes, what determines initial learning speed before this cycle begins? Some insights come from unexpected sources. Dr. Eleanor Frost's research with video games has revealed fascinating patterns. Frost studied how quickly people learn to play complex strategy games, tracking both their performance and their physiological responses. She discovered that faster learners exhibited a distinctive pattern of autonomic nervous system activity. The emerging picture is bewilderingly complex. Learning speed differences appear to stem from a constellation of factors: genetic variations affecting neuroplasticity, early childhood experiences shaping brain architecture, domain-specific neural networks, attention and working memory capabilities, sleep quality, motivation patterns, autonomic nervous system regulation, metacognitive skills, prior knowledge structures, and social learning abilities. No single factor determines who learns quickly and who struggles. Rather, it's the interaction of these factors that creates the unique learning profile of each individual. But this complexity leads to a profound question. If learning speed depends on so many variables, Can slower learners become faster? Or are the differences fundamentally fixed? The breakthrough in understanding learning speed differences came not from studying exceptional learners, but from examining those who transformed from slow to fast learners. These learning metamorphs, as Dr. Yasmin Garcia dubbed them in her groundbreaking 2020 study, provide the most compelling evidence that learning speed is far more malleable than previously thought. Garcia's team identified 50 adults who reported dramatic improvements in their learning abilities after age 25, well past the period when the brain is considered most plastic. These individuals underwent comprehensive cognitive testing, brain imaging, genetic analysis, and detailed interviews about their learning histories. What Garcia discovered shattered conventional wisdom about fixed learning capacities. The learning metamorphs showed distinctive changes in their neural connectivity patterns compared to a control group. Most significantly, they had developed stronger connections between the prefrontal cortex, involved in executive function, and regions specialized for various types of learning. It was as if they had built new highways between the brain's command center and its specialized processing regions, Garcia explains. This allowed for more efficient coordination of cognitive resources during learning. But how had they achieved these neural changes? The answer lies in what Garcia calls the 5 pillars of accelerated learning. 5 key factors that appeared consistently in the learning metamorphs experiences. The first pillar was strategic difficulty. The metamorphs had all engaged with material that pushed them just beyond their current capabilities, what psychologist Lev Vygotsky called the zone of proximal development. This optimal challenge level triggered the release of neurochemicals that promote plasticity, including dopamine, acetylcholine, and brain-derived neurotrophic factor, BDNF. Too easy, and the brain doesn't need to change, Garcia notes. Too difficult, and stress hormones like cortisol inhibit learning. The sweet spot is material that stretches you but remains within reach. The second pillar was distributed practice, spacing learning sessions optimally over time rather than cramming. The metamorphs had intuitively discovered what cognitive scientists have recently proven, that spacing learning sessions allows time for memory consolidation processes to occur, strengthening neural connections. Dr. Paul Kelvin, a neuroscientist at Cambridge University, has mapped this process using advanced imaging techniques. His research shows that when learning is spaced over time, the hippocampus, crucial for memory formation, interacts with the neocortex during sleep and rest periods, gradually transferring information to long-term storage. The brain doesn't just passively record information, Kelvin explains. It actively reconstructs memories during consolidation, strengthening the most important connections and pruning the less relevant ones. This process requires time between learning sessions. The third pillar was retrieval practice, actively recalling information rather than passively reviewing it. The metamorphs regularly tested themselves on material they were learning, forcing their brains to reconstruct the neural pathways associated with that information. Dr. Elizabeth Rhodes of Washington University has demonstrated that retrieval practice produces different patterns of brain activity than passive review. When we struggle to recall information, multiple brain regions work together to reconstruct the memory. This strengthens the connections between these regions, making future retrieval easier and faster. Each time you retrieve a memory, you're essentially rebuilding it, Rhodes says. This process strengthens the neural pathways associated with that memory, making them more efficient. The fourth pillar was interleaving, practicing multiple related skills or concepts in a mixed fashion rather than focusing on one at a time. The metamorphs regularly switched between different aspects of what they were learning, forcing their brains to continually adapt. This approach creates what Dr. Nathan Teller calls desirable difficulties that enhance learning. When the brain must constantly shift gears, it forms stronger, more flexible neural pathways. It also becomes better at discriminating between similar concepts or skills. Block practice feels more productive in the moment, Teller notes, but interleaving leads to better long-term learning and transfer to new situations. It forces the brain to work harder, which strengthens the connections. The fifth pillar was metacognitive reflection, regularly analyzing one's own learning process to identify weaknesses and adjust strategies. The metamorphs consistently evaluated their understanding, identified confusion points, and modified their approaches accordingly. This reflection activates regions of the prefrontal cortex involved in executive function, strengthening their connection to learning-related brain areas. Over time, this creates more efficient coordination between different neural networks involved in learning. The metamorphs weren't just learning content, Garcia explains. They were learning how to learn. With each cycle of reflection and adjustment, they were literally rewiring their brains to learn more efficiently. What's most remarkable about these 5 pillars is that none of them depend on innate intellectual capacity. They are strategies and approaches that can be adopted by anyone. The metamorphs weren't born exceptional learners. They became exceptional learners through specific practices that altered their neural functioning. This insight has profound implications. If learning speed is largely a function of specific practices rather than fixed capacities, then the gap between fast and slow learners might be bridgeable for many people. To test this hypothesis, Garcia's team recruited 30 self-identified, slow learners for a 6-month intervention based on the 5 pillars. The results were astonishing. After training in these approaches, participants showed an average 37% improvement in learning speed across multiple domains, with some improving by more than 60%. Brain scans revealed changes in neural connectivity patterns similar to those observed in the original metamorphs, though less pronounced. This suggested that the intervention had begun to rewire their brains for more efficient learning. But perhaps the most surprising finding emerged when Garcia examined the relationship between traditional intelligence measures and learning transformation. The correlation was weak. Some participants with average IQ scores showed dramatic improvements, while some with very high IQ scores showed only modest gains. Traditional intelligence measures capture something real, Garcia acknowledges. But they don't predict who can become a faster learner through these approaches. That depends more on consistency of practice and willingness to engage in reflection. This finding aligns with recent research by Dr. Kunal Jayoba at New York University, who studied learning outcomes in educational settings. Jayoba found that while IQ correlates with initial learning speed, it explains less than 25% of the variance in learning outcomes over longer periods. Other factors, particularly learning strategies, persistence, and metacognitive skills, account for far more of the difference. What looks like innate learning ability is often actually a set of developed skills and habits, Jayoba explains. The good news is that these can be cultivated by almost anyone willing to put in the effort. The implications extend beyond individual learning to education systems. Traditional education often treats students as having relatively fixed learning capacities, with instruction paced accordingly. But if learning speed is largely a function of specific practices, then perhaps education should focus more on teaching these practices. Dr. Miranda Chun has implemented this approach in several school districts, training teachers to incorporate the 5 pillars into their instruction. The results have been promising, with significant reductions in achievement gaps between previously fast and slow learners. We're seeing students who were struggling begin to thrive, Chun reports. Not because we've changed what they're learning, but because we've changed how they're learning. This doesn't mean that all differences in learning speed can be eliminated. Genetic factors still influence aspects of cognition, and early developmental experiences shape brain architecture in ways that aren't completely reversible. Some people will always learn certain things faster than others, but the gap appears to be far more bridgeable than previously thought. With the right approaches, many slow learners can become significantly faster, and even those who are already fast can accelerate further. This represents a fundamental shift in our understanding of human cognitive potential, from viewing learning speed as a largely fixed trait to seeing it as a modifiable skill set. The implications for education, professional development, and personal growth are profound. As Dr. Garcia puts it, we're not all born with the same learning potential, but most of us are capable of becoming much faster learners than we currently are. The brain is more malleable than we ever imagined, and the right practices can transform it. The discovery that learning speed is largely modifiable rather than fixed has far-reaching implications across multiple domains. Perhaps the most immediate impact is on education systems worldwide, which have traditionally been designed around the assumption that students have relatively stable learning capacities. If learning speed is actually highly responsive to specific practices, then our approach to education requires fundamental rethinking. Rather than sorting students based on perceived ability and pacing instruction accordingly, schools might focus on equipping all students with the metacognitive strategies and learning practices that accelerate learning. Dr. Sarah Ramirez, an educational psychologist who has implemented such approaches in schools across California, has observed remarkable results. When we explicitly teach students how to learn, not just what to learn, we see dramatic shifts in their trajectories, she reports. Students previously labeled as slow often make the most dramatic gains. This has profound implications for educational equity. Research has consistently shown that students from disadvantaged backgrounds are more likely to be classified as slow learners and placed in lower academic tracks. If these classifications reflect differences in learning practices rather than innate capacities, then explicitly teaching effective learning strategies could significantly reduce achievement gaps. Dr. Marcus Thompson, who studies educational equity at Howard University, sees this as a potential game changer. Many achievement gaps reflect differences in exposure to effective learning practices, not differences in potential, he argues. By making these practices explicit rather than implicit, we can level the playing field. The implications extend beyond traditional education to workforce development. As automation eliminates routine jobs and creates new roles requiring novel skills, the ability to learn quickly becomes increasingly valuable. Organizations that can accelerate employee learning gain significant competitive advantages. Catherine Jones, Chief Learning Officer at a Fortune 500 technology company, has implemented training programs based on the 5 pillars of accelerated learning. The results have been transformative, she reports. Employees complete technical training 40% faster and show better knowledge retention. This translates directly to our bottom line. The economic implications are substantial. A 2022 analysis by the McKinsey Global Institute estimated that improving workforce learning efficiency by just 20% could add $3.7 trillion to global GDP by 2030. This reflects both reduced training costs and faster deployment of new skills in rapidly evolving industries. Beyond economic impacts, the malleability of learning speed has profound implications for addressing cognitive decline in aging populations. Research by Dr. Raymond Chin at the National Institute on Aging suggests that many aspects of cognitive slowdown in older adults reflect declining use of effective learning strategies, rather than irreversible neural degeneration. Chen's team implemented a program teaching older adults the 5 pillars of accelerated learning. Participants showed significant improvements in learning speed and memory performance, with brain scans revealing increased connectivity between prefrontal regions and learning networks. We're not claiming to reverse all aspects of cognitive aging, Chen cautions. But many older adults have far greater capacity for learning than previously recognized. With the right approaches, they can maintain cognitive vitality much longer. The implications also extend to rehabilitation for individuals with brain injuries or learning disabilities. Traditional approaches often focus on compensating for perceived deficits rather than rebuilding learning capacity. But Dr. Alicia Patel's work at the Rehabilitation Institute of Chicago suggests a more optimistic possibility. Patel has applied the principles of accelerated learning to rehabilitation for traumatic brain injury patients. Her results suggest that many patients can substantially rebuild learning capacity through targeted interventions that reshape neural connectivity patterns. The brain has remarkable capacity for reorganization, Patel explains. By systematically applying these principles, we're helping patients redevelop learning capabilities that were initially thought to be permanently lost. Even for individuals with developmental learning disabilities like dyslexia or ADHD, the research suggests more optimistic possibilities. While these conditions involve real neurological differences, they may not impose the fixed limitations previously assumed. Dr. Julian Reeves has studied interventions for dyslexic students based on the 5 pillars approach. His research shows that while dyslexic individuals continue to process written language differently from typical readers, many can develop compensatory mechanisms that dramatically accelerate their learning in all areas, including reading. Dyslexia doesn't disappear, Reeves clarifies, but its limiting effects on overall learning capacity can be significantly reduced through targeted interventions that build metacognitive skills and efficient learning strategies. Similarly, Dr. Catherine Wu's research with ADHD patients suggests that many can develop personalized adaptations of the 5 pillars that work with their attentional patterns rather than against them. These adaptations often involve more frequent switches between topics, leveraging the natural attentional variability of ADHD, while maintaining the core principles of effective learning. We're not trying to make people with ADHD learn like neurotypical individuals, Wu explains. We're helping them discover how their unique cognitive patterns can support accelerated learning when properly channeled. The malleability of learning speed also has implications for how we understand intelligence more broadly. Traditional conceptions of intelligence as a relatively fixed capacity may need revision in light of evidence that learning efficiency, a key component of intelligent behavior, can be substantially modified. Dr. Ravi Mehta, a cognitive scientist who studies intelligence, suggests that we may need to distinguish between fluid processing capacity, the brain's raw computational power, and learning efficiency, how effectively that capacity is deployed during learning. Fluid processing capacity may have more genetic constraints, Mehta theorizes, but learning efficiency appears highly responsive to experience and practice. 2 individuals with similar processing capacity can show dramatically different learning speeds based on how effectively they deploy that capacity. This distinction helps explain why traditional IQ tests, which measure aspects of fluid processing capacity, show relative stability over time while learning performance can change dramatically. The tests capture something real but miss the crucial dimension of how efficiently cognitive resources are allocated during learning. Perhaps the most profound implication concerns how we understand human potential more broadly. If learning speed, a characteristic previously thought to be largely fixed, is actually highly modifiable, what other aspects of human capacity might be more malleable than we've assumed? Dr. Leona Richards, who studies human potential at the University of California, Berkeley, sees the research on learning speed as part of a larger paradigm shift. We're moving from a relatively static view of human capacities to a much more dynamic one, she observes. Across multiple domains, cognitive, emotional, physical, we're discovering that the limits of human development are far less fixed than previously believed. This shift has philosophical implications for how we understand human nature. If our capacities are largely shaped by specific practices rather than predetermined by genetics, then the development of human potential becomes more a matter of cultural transmission than biological inheritance. The fastest learners aren't necessarily those born with special brains, Richards argues. They're often those who have acquired the most effective learning practices, either through explicit teaching or fortunate exposure. This suggests that accelerating human development may depend more on effectively transmitting these practices than on genetic engineering or other biological interventions. This perspective also changes how we might think about artificial intelligence. Current AI systems can process vast amounts of data but lack the metacognitive capabilities that allow humans to learn with remarkable efficiency from limited examples. Understanding how humans accelerate learning through metacognitive strategies might inform the development of more human-like AI learning systems. At the individual level, perhaps the most significant implication is the degree to which each person can take greater control of their own cognitive development. If learning speed is substantially modifiable through specific practices, then each of us has far more agency in shaping our cognitive future than previously recognized. This realization can be both empowering and challenging. It places more responsibility on individuals for developing their learning capacities while offering the hopeful message that such development is possible regardless of starting point. As Dr. Garcia puts it, the research doesn't suggest that everyone can become a genius, but it does suggest that most people can become much more efficient learners than they currently are. And in a world where learning agility increasingly determines success, that's a profoundly hopeful message. Imagine standing before two saplings planted in similar soil under the same sun. One grows rapidly, reaching skyward with robust branches and vibrant leaves. The other develops more slowly, its growth steady but unhurried. For centuries, we might have simply declared the first tree naturally vigorous and the second inherently stunted, their destinies written in their seeds. Yet a master gardener sees something different. She notices that the faster-growing tree has developed an optimal root structure that efficiently captures water and nutrients. This structure wasn't predetermined by genetics alone but emerged through a complex dance between the sapling's innate characteristics and subtle environmental factors, the pressure of the soil, the pattern of rainfall, perhaps even the beneficial fungi that colonized its roots. The master gardener understands that with careful cultivation, the slower-growing tree might develop a similarly efficient root system. Not identical, each tree remains unique, but potentially just as effective. The difference in growth rates reflects not just what each tree inherently is, but what it has learned to do. So it is with human learning. The faster learners among us have not simply won a genetic lottery. They have developed, through fortune, circumstance, or deliberate practice, more efficient ways of encoding, processing, and retrieving information. They have built their neural root systems to optimize the capture and utilization of knowledge. And like the second sapling under the master gardener's care, slower learners can develop these capacities too. The brain's plasticity, its remarkable ability to reorganize itself through experience, means that learning how to learn is itself learnable. This insight transforms our understanding of human potential. The question is no longer who can learn quickly and who cannot. It becomes, how can each person develop the practices that allow their unique mind to learn most efficiently? The distance between human potential and human achievement lies not in what we are born with, but in what we learn to do with what we have.